I think I'm going to go ahead and get started with the introduction while people are still filtering in. I'd like to start with introducing our moderator today. Mary Van Noordhoek is Professor Emeritus of English and Canadian Studies at the University of Akron. She is the current chair of Lifelong Learning Program at Kendal at Oberlin and a longtime member of the Museum's Volunteer Guild. Mary, thank you for moderating the Q&A for these webinars, and thank you for all you do for the Oberlin community. I also want to do a shout out to Erik Inglis for having a little bit of influence in getting today's speaker. So thank you to you. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Erik Inglis is from Oberlin class of 1989 and is the Mildred C. Professor of Art at Oberlin College, specializing in medieval art history in Europe and the Mediterranean. He has published on art from France and Flanders, particularly the 15th century court artist Jean Fouquet, and his current research addresses imagination in the medieval period. This talk accompanies a semester-long exhibition of Dürer prints from the Allens collection. The exhibition will be on view in the museum until January 18th for anyone who is local. Please note that the museum will be closed December 22nd through January 1st for the winter shutdown, but will reopen on January 2nd. And I'm pleased to announce that we will now be open on Sundays after the first of the year. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, I encourage you to come this week or between January 2nd and the 18th. So now, thank you to Erik for being here today. We are looking forward to this webinar on Albrecht Dürer. And now I turn it over to Erik.
All right, thank you very much for being here today. It's tremendously heartening to see so many people, and I'm actually very excited, as I was last week, that this is reaching a national, even an international audience of supporters of the Allen. So I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity. As I've been grateful for the opportunity to learn so much about this artist, Albrecht Dürer, and to have a chance to share it with students and with you. So last week, I tried to give a kind of introduction to Dürer as a creator and an entrepreneur. And this week, I want to take in some ways a more personal angle on him, maybe a more limited angle on him by talking about the question of family. And in thinking about Dürer as family man, which for reasons we'll get into, maybe a slightly unusual angle or maybe an imperfect angle, but I think a very particular, interesting angle on him. There are a couple of things I want to note. First, I'll be structuring this starting with his immediate family, then moving on to what would have been in some ways the next most important family in his life, which was the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, then their extended family as well. And then looking at some of Dürer's representations of earthly families. One of the things that really struck me in preparing the exhibition and putting the exhibition together with Hannah Werda-Kinney was just how consistently families show up in his art. Even if they don't seem to be the explicit content of that art. And so that was sort of what led me to this lens for today. We're also very fortunate if we want to think about Dürer and family in that he left us a lot of records. And so I'm just going to hold up right now to the camera this 2-volume collection of what's basically Dürer's literary remains. This is a production of a German translator named Jeffrey Ashcroft, who calls this Albrecht Dürer a documentary biography. And what Ashcroft has gathered here and translated and annotated is every scrap of documentation about Albrecht Dürer from actually prior to his birth in 1471 through his death in 1528 up to about 1600. And Dürer, as we'll see, was a conscientious self-documenter, following in some steps in the footsteps of his father. And that gives us a tremendous opportunity to think about him in the context of his family, to see him thinking about his family, and in some cases drawing, and in some cases painting his family. So that's where we're going to start. I'm showing you right now a juxtaposition that I showed last week as well to introduce Dürer. This is a self-portrait of Albrecht Dürer's father, who was Albrecht Dürer the Elder, from around 1484, with Albrecht Dürer the Younger's self-portrait also about the same year, with his annotation later, an annotation added probably in the 15 teens, that he had done this drawing when he was 13. Start with the father, who Dürer the Younger is clearly devoted to. Albrecht Dürer the Elder was a goldsmith, born in 1427, living until 1502, so dying at 75, dying when his son is 31. In the drawing, his self-portrait drawing, we actually get a sense of him as a goldsmith. He's holding a little metalwork figurine in his hands, a knight with a banner. Similar subject matter to some of the Dürers you can see upstairs in the Allen right now. He was actually an immigrant from Astos in Hungary, where his grandfather had also been a goldsmith. So the Dürers are a family of goldsmiths. He moves to Nuremberg in the 1460s, and on his way to Nuremberg, actually travels a fair amount, we believe, through the Netherlands. So he might have seen artists like Loiset Liadet. He might have seen artists like Roger van der Weyden traveling in the Netherlands in the mid-15th century before settling in Nuremberg, where he takes up his residence and remains for the rest of his life. The name or the word Astos, if we translated that into English, would be door. And so Astos in German became Dürer, which became the family name once they were resident in Nuremberg. In Nuremberg, Albrecht Sr. marries Barbara Holper, who is the daughter of artisans, in 1467. She was 24 years younger than Dürer the Elder, and outlived him by 10 years. This is a diptych probably painted both panels by Albrecht Dürer, the Younger, in 1490, as he is emerging to his career as an artist. The panel on the left shows the mother, Barbara Holper. The panel on the right, the father, Albrecht Dürer the Elder. One of the things that Albrecht Dürer the Elder left his son was a family record. And this is among the first places where we can begin to get insight into the family. And so here I'm quoting from Ashcroft's translation. Dürer writes that my father had a special liking for me when he saw that I was eager to apply myself in learning. That is why my father let me go to school. And once I learned to read and write, he took me out of school again and taught me the goldsmith's craft. So we've got an idea that Albrecht Dürer the Younger has an elementary education, learning to read and write in German. We don't think he ever became completely fluent in Latin. And then his father begins to train him as a goldsmith. So the father takes him on as an apprentice in his own shop. And by the time I could do competent work, I felt myself drawn more towards painting than to goldsmith's work. I put this to my father, but he was not well pleased because he rued the time that I had wasted learning to be a goldsmith. And so here we get an early insight, I think, both into Albrecht Dürer the Younger and the father. First, the Younger training as a goldsmith, but recognizing that he would prefer to be a painter. And he eventually becomes also a printmaker, as we saw last week. And the father is worried about this. The father, practical, the father, a goldsmith, is aware that, or worries that, the training Albrecht the Younger has already received as a goldsmith will now go to waste if he's to become a painter. Dürer goes on, however, he relented. And in the year of our Lord, 1486, on St. Andrew's Day, my father bound me as an apprentice to Michael Volgemet to serve him 3 years. During this time, God gave me the diligence to learn well. And when I had served my time, my father sent me off as a journeyman. And I stayed away for 4 years until my father summoned me back. So Dürer becomes a painter, training with Volgemet. It's actually in 1490 that he ends his apprenticeship and leaves Nuremberg to go off on his Wanderjahre, his, in some ways, the extension of the apprenticeship. And this diptych has usually been cast as, in some sense, we might even say, potentially sentimentally, Dürer's proof to his family that he can succeed as a painter with this portrait. There's some question, some have cast doubt on whether the painting of the mother is by Dürer or perhaps by Vogelmut, his teacher, or Pleidenwerf, who is an assistant of Vogelmut's. But the Germanische Nationalmuseum, where this painting is now, attributes the painting to Dürer. The painting of the father has always been attributed to the son. If we look at the back of the painting, we see the Dürer family arms, invented potentially by Albrecht Dürer the Elder, along with Barbara Holper's arms. So the Dürer family arms, given that the name is Dürer, are the set of doors you see here. And I think one of the notable things here, if we think about Dürer and family, is that the family is multiple generations who recognize their connections to each other and are proud of those connections and eager to have them remembered. And in that, we have, I think, real insight into the way that Dürer is very like other members of the artisanal class in Nuremberg at this time, both his father, his mother, and himself. Get a better sense of this, it's useful to note that in Nuremberg in the 15th century, 15th and into the 16th century, one of the most common things to do in a church was, after your death, to have a memorial shield set up to yourself with the family coat of arms. And so I'm showing you here the memorial shield of Hans Pirkheimer, father of one of Dürer's closest associates, Willibald Pirkheimer, which has a very similar format where you have a helmet, as Dürer has a helmet here, and then you have the family coat of arms below it. We see the family coat of arms down below here. To give you a sense of what this would be like in a church, I'm showing you this wall in the Church of St. Sebaldus, the parish church for the Dürer family, with a different family's coat of arms hanging on the wall. So that when Dürer is painting the portrait of his parents and including their family arms on the back, he is participating in a kind of familial memory that was absolutely common in Nuremberg of his day. Showing, in a sense, his belonging to this group, which is eager to mark its family connections and to some degree advertise its status on these memorial shields that will hang up in churches or on the back of portraits you painted of your family. Dürer is also proud of these arms, and they appear a couple times in his art. So in 1523, he makes a print of his family coat of arms, again with the helmet and the wings above. In both the painting of 1490 and the print of 1523, he also includes the figure of an African, or a figure maybe we should better say with African features. This was fairly common in 15th and 16th century German arms and meant to add a touch of, I think we could say, condescending exoticism in the family arms. Other than that, it's difficult to trace a specific meaning to this device. When Erhard Schoen, a German printmaker in the 1520s, does a portrait of Dürer, which becomes effectively his last portrait, he includes not the entire family coat of arms, the set of doors with the initials and the date of this portrait, 1527. So again, Dürer is promoting his own coat of arms, and his coat of arms is recognized by those who are portraying him. And that's a coat of arms he got from his father. So again, this cultivation and memory of family ties is something very important to him. The end of that Wanderjahre, or several Wanderjahres, he actually is on the road for 3 or 4 years, going to Strasbourg, Colmar, Basel. He paints a portrait of himself on parchment, potentially because this made it more portable. And this is just on the eve of his return. And he writes that he returned from the Wanderjahre, his traveling years, because his family had arranged a marriage with Agnes Fry, who he marries in 1894. And here we see Dürer's drawing of her from 1494, inscribed, "My Agnes." And maybe at this moment, I'll pause to see if there are questions. Again, if you post your questions in the Q&A, Mary can relay them to me.
Okay, we have 2 questions about the coat of arms.
Mhm.
Was it unusual for a tradesman to have a coat of arms? And following that, Would the Dürer family have created their own coat of arms when they arrived in Germany? Is that how it worked for any family? Come up with your own design?
Two excellent questions. So it would have been absolutely common for craftsmen and artisans of Dürer's status and the Dürer family status. Again, so Albrecht Dürer, the elder, is a goldsmith, which means he's working at the top of the market, luxury line. One of the reasons he picks Nuremberg is it's a very, very important trading city. With a wealthy mercantile class and nobles and aristocrats around. And for those groups, it was completely common to have these coats of arms. They are, though, invented coats of arms that the family has invented. So we think that it was Albrecht Dürer's father who probably invented the idea of the doors, having reached Germany, that Dürer the younger then propagates. This was a 15th century innovation in that heraldry back in the 12th, 13th, and 14th century, especially the 12th and 13th century, the century of its origins, very much limited to the aristocracy. And I think it's quite possible to imagine that aristocrats in Dürer's day might have seen the heraldry on a painter's family painting or a printer's print, as on the left, as potentially pretentious or potentially getting above their station. And certainly if we recognize that a very prominent part of this coat of arms is the helmet in each case, Dürer may have tried on a helmet once, but Dürer is not a soldier and has no need for a helmet. So this is a purely fictional aspect of the coat of arms.
Okay, we have another question about this. Why a goat?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know. I'm always tempted because I'm a professor to try to come up with an explanation. My line of inquiry would be whether Holper and goat have any relationship, but I don't have a specific answer to that question, I'm afraid.
And does the African figure relate to the slave trade? And was it a common figure?
Excellent question. So in the 1490s, there are increasing numbers of Africans in Europe, some of whom are servants, some of whom are diplomats, and some of whom are enslaved. In the 1520s, early 1520s, when Dürer is traveling in the Netherlands, he meets a Portuguese diplomat there, a Portuguese trade representative, who is a factor, is the official title. And Dürer does a drawing of the woman he describes as the factor's Moor, Moor being a slightly condescending term for Africans. It's unclear to us whether the woman he draws, who he names in his inscription, I apologize for not having an image of it, was a servant for the factor or enslaved. But this is absolutely in the period of the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. And I think we could say in each of these two cases, the figure in the painted coat of arms, the figure in the printed coat of arms is Dürer's caricature of African features, exoticized as well by the hat and exoticized by the presence of the prominent earrings, gold in the painting, presumably meant to represent gold earrings in the print, which is black and white. And there's very disturbing mention in Dürer's treatise on human proportion, a condescending white supremacist, condescending is the wrong term, underweighted. I think we could say a very frank statement, an explicit statement of white supremacy over Africans. And I think we're seeing that as well in the use of this figure in the family coat of arms.
There is a question that is not related to this, but perhaps we could try answering it now.
Sure.
Is there a catalog at the Allen for the Dürer exhibition? If not, how best to reach the images if we can't come to Ohio?
Excellent question. So there is online a virtual reality version of the exhibition that will let you read all the labels and see all the prints in high resolution, and also allow you to navigate the exhibition.
Okay, I think that's all for now.
All right. Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you for the questions, everyone. So with this, we've now got Dürer married in 1494. Immediately after his wedding, or fairly immediately after his wedding, he goes to Italy for a year or two. And this has led to all sorts of speculation about the state of his marriage and the happiness of his marriage. I think for most of modern scholarship on Dürer, going back to the 19th century, going up through much of the 20th century, Agnes has been viewed as an unsympathetic, unsupportive wife. That goes basically to a single letter by Willibald Pirkheimer, who is a close companion, close friend of Dürer's, written after Dürer's death. If we actually look at what information we have about the marriage, there is comparatively little. And so in some ways, one of the things I want to steer away from today is the question of what the state of their marriage was, whether it was happy or not, and instead look at what we can say that they did together as we move on, continuing with the family. The next portrait Dürer does of a family member is again, well, I should say the next surviving portrait he does of a family member is of his father again at the age of 70, which he does in 1497. This is almost certainly a copy of the painting, made probably within the 16th century by an admirer and an emulator of Dürer, that's now at the National Gallery in London. This is a painting done, as you see in the caption, 5 years before Dürer the Elder's death. And this is maybe a point that's useful to note, recognizing the likeness between the painting from 1490 and the painting 7 years later from 1497. The age of the father. In the Dürer family chronicle, which Dürer the Younger took over from his father and continued to add in, he writes of his father, "He lived a life of great toil, of hard and taxing work, and had no other means of sustenance than what he earned with his handiwork for himself, his wife, and children." I should have mentioned, by the way, earlier that Albrecht Dürer the Elder and Barbara Holper have 18 children in the 24 years of their marriage together. The earliest born in 1467, the last in 1492. So she spent almost half their marriage pregnant. Of those children, only 3 sons survived to adulthood. Albrecht, Hans, and Endres. We'll meet Endres in a portrait in just a moment. So Albrecht Dürer the Elder, he says, having to work to sustain himself, his wife, and children. This means he had little indeed. He suffered also all manner of distress, disparagement, and enmity. Yet by many who knew him, he was highly esteemed, for he led the life of an honest Christian, was a patient, meek man, peaceable towards everyone, and he was steadfastly thankful to God. He had little use for much company and worldly pleasure. He was too a man of few words and one who feared God. So Dürer, in his family record, as much potentially as in this portrait, taking care to record his father as a devout, pious, maybe we could say comparatively silent man, or at least a man of few words, and also one who had his sufferings, although Dürer does not go into detail about what those sufferings were. In 1504 to 1506, Dürer goes back to Italy. This time we know he was in Venice. We think he was probably in Venice in the earlier trip from the mid-1490s. I'm showing you on the left what's in some ways the major achievement in painting of his time in Venice, the Feast of the Rose Garlands, which he paints for the German Merchants Confraternity in Venice. We know about Dürer's time in Venice because he writes several letters to Willibald Pirkheimer, who I'm showing you here on the right. I apologize for that R in Willibald. That should be B-A-L-D. I apologize for the typo. The letters that he writes to Willibald are tremendous letters. I would definitely encourage you, again, go to the art library, grab a copy of this book from Open Reserve, and read them. They give an incredibly granular idea of what Dürer's time in Venice was like. And they also give us some insight into his family back in Nuremberg. So, for example, he writes to Willibald that he's concerned about his mother and wife. This is after the death of his father. that he hopes his mother is selling his prints at the relic fair, which happened every year in Nuremberg. I'm showing you here a print from the late 15th century that shows the holy regalia, that is the regalia of the Roman Empire, which were stored in Nuremberg in a church and displayed once a year on one of the main places, one of the main squares, right here in this 17th century map. So Dürer is counting on his mother in his absence to be selling his prints at the regalia fair. He also notes to Pirkheimer that if his mother is having trouble selling them, his wife Agnes will be coming back soon from Frankfurt, where she's been selling prints at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And what this gives us insight into is that this marriage is also, in some sense, a business relationship. This is a business family. Or maybe I'd rather say a family business. And so one of the ways that Dürer can afford travel in Venice, in addition to a significant loan from Pirkheimer, is because he knows his mother and his wife are back in Germany selling his prints in Nuremberg and at Frankfurt, partners effectively in the dissemination of his work. This intersects with what we were talking about last week with Dürer as an entrepreneur. Here we have Dürer as a family man and the family helping to advance that entrepreneurship. That entrepreneurship is so successful that in 1509, Dürer is able to purchase this house, which still survives. If we're looking at this map of Nuremberg, the house is just up here near the city wall, right on the corner that I'm gesturing to with this arrow. Dürer may have lived in this house as early as 1506, 1507, but he purchases it in 1509 and lives here for the rest of his life. That is until 1528, when he dies in this house. The house was remembered, and in the early 19th century, purchased by the city of Nuremberg to become the Dürer House. And this is the first house museum devoted to an artist in the Western tradition. The exterior obviously has been carefully maintained and partially reconstructed. The interior by the early 19th century had been completely changed multiple times. So we actually have very little idea about what his interior arrangements were. But we do have a sense of this very, very significant dwelling where he lived with his family for the last almost 20 years of his life. Questions here?
Yes, we have some questions dealing with some of the earlier.
Sure.
Sorry. Where does the red color in the coat of arms on the back of the painting come from? Does the red and yellow represent anything, or is it an artistic choice?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I'm taking notes. I'll have to teach a second Dürer class. The red and yellow, which is dominant not just in the arm, not just in the, say, the yellow doors on the red shield, but throughout the rest. I guess I would say strike me as not uncommon when it comes to heraldry. So I'm not positive there'd be a significant or a particular significance, but I also can't say for sure, I'm afraid.
Could you possibly speak a little more about the portraits of Dürer's parents? In particular, were these two works created as pendants, or was the portrait of his mother possibly cut down? Is there any suggestion it belonged to a larger work?
That's an excellent question. And indeed, I'm dying to know who asked that question. The portrait of his
Person
mother.
is anonymous.
All right, so thank you, Anonymous. But excellent observations. One of the curious things about these portraits, first of all, they're in different locations. The one on the right is in the Uffizi, which it reached in the 18th century. The one on the left is now in Nuremberg after some time in Paris in the 19th century. So they were separated by the 17th century. And the portrait of the mother was cut down. There's some suggestion that the portrait of the mother was painted first and independently because she is shown on the left side as we look at the diptych, which in a typical diptych with husband and wife, the husband would be on the left side as we looked at it and the wife on the right. That suggests this portrait may have started independently with portrait of the father added later. That plays into the idea also that some scholars have felt this is not by Dürer, the portrait of the mother not by Dürer. That suspicion was raised already in the 16th century. And that he paints the portrait of his father to add to an existing portrait of his mother by a different artist. As I said, there is still disagreement over this, although my general sense of the attributions is that people have come around to thinking of both of these as being painted by Dürer.
What is or are Dürer's mediums of his paintings?
He's painting in oil paint, and typically that would be linseed oil.
And did Dürer meet or comment on Titian during his time in Venice?
Dürer has no direct remarks on Titian. He does talk about meeting Giovanni Bellini. He attempted to meet Mantegna. We have an account of him trying to see Mantegna, and Mantegna dies just before he gets there, which Dürer reports as being distressing. But we don't have discussion of him meeting Titian. We do know he had some correspondence or an exchange of art with Raphael, the artist who was based in Rome.
Was the size of Dürer's house considered normal or larger than those of most Nuremberg residents? Why so large? Was it because it was a workplace and a residence?
Excellent question. So this is absolutely a large house by 15th and 16th century standards. When Dürer dies in 1528, he's one of the richest men in Nuremberg, one of the 100 richest men. He spent 160 gulden to acquire the house, which was a significant sum of money at this time. It absolutely was large in part because it's a residence and the site of his work. It's probably the place as well that would have housed his apprentices and assistants. And you've got to imagine him potentially selling prints out of the house as well. Although, as I said, the complete reworking of the interior means that's mostly on speculation, as opposed to being able to walk into the house and see what was done in what particular room.
And finally, could you tell us more about the little book of holy things in which the display tower of sacred relics image appears?
Yeah, sure. So in Nuremberg, the regalia of the Holy Roman Emperor were kept. The most prominent of these was the lance that was said to have stabbed Christ on the cross. You're seeing that in the banner up here, hanging above the sort of tower. Other aspects that were kept, the lance itself also had a nail of the Holy Cross. Roger II, who was a king of Sicily in the 12th century, had a mantle created for himself, which passed into the possessions of the Holy Roman Emperor, and that was displayed. There were several other objects that were typically during the year kept in a silver chest, which was suspended in a church, so you could be in their presence. And then once a year, the regalia were taken, as I said, to a tower constructed in the main square, the central square of Nuremberg, to be displayed to pilgrims. And this print by Peter Vischer is part of a pamphlet that you could have acquired if you'd visited to serve as a keepsake of your visit and your sighting of the regalia.
Those are all the questions dealing with this particular section.
All right, thank you so much. A couple years before she dies, Dürer's mother, Barbara Holper, moved into the house with them. Dürer records in that family history that after his father's death, she eventually ran out of her own financial resources. She also became ill, and so she moved into the house with them and lived the last several years of her life there. Shortly before her death, he does this drawing of her. Certainly one of the more astonishing drawings of the 16th century. I think an incredible study of his aged mother. He inscribes it twice in slightly different handwriting. And so we have a sense that he's probably the first inscription, which you're seeing here in darker handwriting, saying on oculi here, the 19th of March. This is Albrecht Dürer's mother. She was 63 years old. A not uncommon way of inscribing a portrait drawing. Then shortly after that, he adds this inscription below. Died in the year 1514 on Tuesday before Holy Cross Week at the 2nd hour of the night. he also records in his family history his mother's last moments. And this is, I think, maybe the most personal aspect we have in his writing. And writing where I think we could say the text of his record is very, very similar, very akin to this portrait drawing of his mother that he does. And so I think it's useful to read this. In the year 1513, early in the morning, my poor pitiable mother, who I took in 2 years after my father's death and cared for because her means had quite run out, had been living with me for 9 years. She fell suddenly so mortally ill that we had to break open her bedroom, since otherwise, because she was unable to unlock the door, we could not get to her. So we carried her downstairs to another room, and she was given both sacraments, for everyone thought she was going to die. Ever since my father's death, she had had nothing but ill health, and her usual habit was to spend her time at church, and she was forever chiding me whenever I did not behave well. And she was forever worrying about me and my brother's sins. And whenever I was entering or leaving the house, she was forever quoting, "Go in the name of Christ." And constantly she would be solemnly admonishing us and ever worrying about the state of our souls. So we have here Dürer's mother, the mother of 18 children, only 3 of whom are surviving at this point, living in her son's house, clearly devout, having been an assistant in certainly her husband's enterprise as a goldsmith, then her son's enterprise as a printer. Now this effectively religious presence in the house. And the good works and acts of pity she did to everyone I cannot adequately number, nor her kind words. My honest mother coped with bearing and bringing up 18 children, often suffered the pestilence and many other serious illnesses, put up with great poverty, scorn, and derision, spiteful words, terrors, and great adversity, yet she was never vindictive. More than a year from that said day when she first fell sick, in 1414, on the 17th day of May, 2 hours before nightfall, my worthy mother Barbara Dürer passed away as a Christian should, with all the sacraments, absolved by papal power from guilt and torment. That caused me such grief that I cannot put into words. God be gracious unto her. Note, her greatest joy was always to speak of God and seek God's honor. And she was in her 63rd year when she died. So I think what we get here, and in some sense, this passage was one of the motivations for thinking of this topic. Dürer left more personal writing like this than any other German artist of the 16th century, and potentially any other artist in Europe in the 16th century. And it gives us an opportunity to see the intersection of his skill as an artist, and I think we could say his sense as a son, and his care for his family, and the cultivation of the memory of his family. As you can tell from the very fact that he's inscribed this is Albrecht Dürer's mother. She was 63 years old. He preserved this drawing with the knowledge that it would survive him. He didn't note to himself, "This is my mother." That would probably be an inscription he wouldn't need to add. It's not that he anticipated us directly, but he did anticipate future witnesses. And I think we have to imagine with that family chronicle that he writes, he also anticipates future witnesses. With the family chronicle, he's probably anticipating future witnesses within his own family, although he and Agnes have no children. That's been one of the causes for the speculation their marriage was unhappy. With this portrait, we could again imagine that he was anticipating this would pass through his family. But I think he was also an ambitious enough artist that he imagines there will be larger, non-familial people who would be interested in this drawing and interested in his own family history.
We do have a question now.
Uh-huh.
Dürer's description of his mother putting up with poverty, scorn, and derision doesn't seem to jibe with their place in society. Can you explain this?
That's a great observation. And I think one of the things we see throughout Dürer's own writings about himself is a simultaneous pride in all that he's achieved, a sense that it's fragile or insecure, and a sense that he is beset on multiple sides by critics, thieves we saw last time stealing his compositions. So in that sense, that claim, and he makes the same claim about his father, that his father had endured poverty. Maybe what we ought to recognize there is maybe not the direct material poverty, but the sense of the fragility of the resources they had. If you think in particular of Dürer being one of 18 children, only 3 of whom survived to adulthood, that many mouths to feed that regularly, I think would have prevented his father from ever feeling completely secure. I think that may be what Dürer is talking about. And I think there may also be there some figurative language, that some of that poverty is the sense of a status only newly gained and challenging to maintain.
Okay, no further questions on this section.
All right. Thank you very much for that question, that observation. We think about Dürer watching his mother die and reflecting on her death and mourning her death. This can give us an early indication, a sort of foreshadowing of one of the things I also want to talk about, which is the way that biblical stories of families could be role models for how Dürer and other Christians in his day thought about their own families, in some ways thought aspirationally about their own families. So what I'm showing you on the right is a print by Dürer from his Life of the Virgin, the publication of 1511, which combined text and image to tell the story of the Virgin Mary. What we're seeing here is one of the last moments, which is the death of the Virgin, the dormition of the Virgin, where she had been granted a favor by her son, Christ, that she would know that her death was imminent so that she could prepare for her death. That was clear one of the things that Barbara Dürer was able to do. She was able to prepare for her death and take the sacraments on her deathbed. In the case of the Virgin Mary, she prepares for her death by notifying the apostles that her death is imminent, and all the apostles come to her bedside to bid her farewell and usher her into the next life. This gives, in some sense, an idealized version of what every Christian aspired to for their death in the 15th and 16th century. And in Dürer's day, you were very much meant to think about what your death would be like and to prepare for that. And the Virgin Mary is held up as a role model. Dürer's account of his mother's death suggests how someone managed that as a role model, or maybe what the ideal was and what the reality actually was. I want to introduce a new member of the family who we haven't seen before. This is Endres Dürer, who's actually not a new member, born in 1484. But in terms of extant portraits of him by Dürer, we don't have any until 1514, the somewhat odd drawing in what's called lost profile on the right, and a different sort of more monumental portrait also by Dürer from 1518 on the left. Endres was trained as a goldsmith, so took his father's art, unlike his older brother Albrecht, and remained working as a goldsmith in Nuremberg, and outlives Dürer by about 10 years. I think on the left we can see Dürer doing, as I said, a straightforward portrait of him. On the right, this lost profile portrait of 1514 may have been done incidentally. You could imagine Dürer, who likes to draw every day and likes to get practice in regularly, asking his brother to hold this pose. Brothers typically don't charge you to model. Then used this pose, and not exactly the figure, but much of the pose, for this very odd etching he does in 1514. One of the few etchings he does, called Composition with 5 Figures. A very neutral term, or sometimes called the Desperate Man, one of the more unusual, dreamlike, maybe even surreal images in his art. And here, drawing he did of Endres that you see on the right has provided the model for this printed figure here on the left. And I don't think we can make any particular connection between the subject of the print on the left and Dürer's feelings about his brother or what his brother was like. Instead, I want to think about this as a chance for the way Dürer's drawings of those around him could feed into his art, independent in some sense of his sense of who those people were and his connection to them. In the 1520s, we have another couple drawings of his wife, Agnes. The one on the right made during his trip to the Netherlands, which he makes with her in 1520, 1521. Here they inscribed, this Albrecht Dürer rendered of his wife in Netherlanders clothing. So they've been traveling in the Netherlands. They've bought her clothing and she's wearing it here. And in some ways he's drawing that, I think, as a record of what this clothing looks like. In the year 1521, since they have had each other in marriage for 26 and a half years, a somewhat curious anniversary to mark. And some people have translated this slightly differently. Are there questions so far?
There are some general questions.
Sure.
What medium is used in the drawings of his brother?
These are pen and ink drawings.
Okay. And what skills and aesthetic concepts carried over from goldsmithing to painting and printmaking?
Excellent question. So as we saw with the self-portrait of his father, holding that little figurine, a goldsmith like his father would have had some skills in anatomy in rendering the human figure. Perhaps most importantly for Dürer as a printmaker, a goldsmith would often have engraved their work. And engraving is one of the techniques with which Dürer makes prints. So there would have been some familiarity with the properties of metals and how to treat them. In terms of the transition from goldsmithing to painting, that would have been a larger stretch. And I think that's where we see Albrecht Dürer the Elder worrying that Dürer's training as a goldsmith would have been wasted once he becomes a painter, where there wouldn't have been so many transferable skills.
And just a quick question dealing with his entrepreneurship. Many of Dürer's are very small, 2x3. Are these comparable to dollar store offerings and cranked out in large numbers?
Excellent question. So Dürer's prints would have been absolutely produced in large numbers. Some of them would have been, I would think we could say affordable, but probably not at the dollar store level of affordable. We do know that there's an active aristocratic collector's market for them. There will be some people who would have bought really entire runs. So Christopher Columbus's son, for example, Ferdinand, has an almost complete collection of Dürers, which he picks up on a visit to Nuremberg. So they're accessible. They're being sold on the streets at that relic fair. They're being sold at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and their prices would not have been forbidding, but maybe one notch above what one finds in a dollar store today.
This is a related question. I think you've answered quite a bit of it. You said Dürer died one of the richest people of Nuremberg. Who was the market for his artworks? Was it the church, commissions from the business community, like the German business group in Venice, publishing ventures, everyday residents? Did regular folk purchase prints to decorate their homes? A lot of Dürer's family's drawings don't seem like they would have earned him outside money.
Excellent question. So absolutely the drawings I'm showing you, for example, right now are done for Dürer's purposes, and I think with the drawing of Endres on the left, probably to give to Endres, or potentially Dürer's record, a portrait that he keeps for himself of his brothers. He did do paintings, and so that Feast of the Rose Garland in Venice, a painting he does for Jakob Heller, an important businessman from Frankfurt in 1408, 1409, are selling for, he's receiving large sums from his patrons. He complains, though, about the paintings because they take a lot of time and his patrons are always breathing down his neck. There's a very tense correspondence he has with Jakob Heller, for example, which I wasn't able to get into last time. So beginning around 1410, he really shifts almost all of his energy to printmaking. Printmaking has the chance to free him of a patron's demands, put him completely in control. It also means, though, that he is then subject to his ability to gauge the market. And I think one of the things we see is him being able to create that market and to gauge it successfully. And it's really, I think, that printmaking market that enables him to become wealthy. Although the final thing that really matters certainly helps with this house. Beginning in the 15 teens, he effectively received a large annual annuity from the city of Nuremberg, thanks to the Emperor Maximilian. And that served as a very strong economic subsidy for him that would have cushioned the ups and downs of the market. So another drawing of Agnes from the trip, which gives us a sense that Dürer is here also using drawings as a way to research things. These are drawings done at slightly different stages on this trip. He traveling through Cologne. He drew this young girl with this very, very prominent head covering and hairstyle. And he noted on that Cologne hair banding. Then on the same sheet, he added a month later, maybe, a drawing of Agnes writing, "On the Rhine, my wife near Beauport." And in this case, I think we have a sense this is a drawing very much for him. He's not necessarily anticipating our eyes on it, in that he's saying, this is my wife near Beauport, which is a little small town on the Rhine. Although even here, the fact that he needs to add that inscription, "my wife," suggests that he has some sense someone after him will be looking at this. And I think what we're getting from this drawing is just as the drawing of his wife in Netherlandish clothes, this is a way of comparing different clothing styles, comparing a young girl with his more middle-aged wife, and setting up a set of kind of comparison and contrast exercises. And then this is bringing me to the Holy Family. So thinking back again to that death of the Virgin and the way that when Dürer thought of his mother's death, he'd been prepared to think about it in some sense by thinking about the death of the Virgin. We can also think about the way images of families and the Holy Family intersect with his ideas of his own family and inform them, and they're mutually informing. So I'm showing you two prints from the Allen, Holy Family with Dragonfly from 1496. This genuine the Holy Family because we have Mary and the Christ child, and then Christ's foster father, effectively Joseph, sleeping on this grassy bench here. In a very, very similar setting, here on the right, the Madonna with the monkey, which we looked at last time, from 1498. This subject, the Madonna and child, sometimes the Madonna and child with Joseph, appears dozens of times in Dürer's art. In his individual prints, it's probably the single most common subject. Because Mary and Jesus were obviously central to Christianity, but also figures of fascination. And as Dürer is market sensitive, he seems to have been aware that a good print of the Virgin and Child was something that would sell. When Hannah Kinney and I were putting together the show, at one point it became, we even contemplated potentially having 20 prints out that would be just the Madonna and Child from the Allen's collection. And that seemed even to us slightly too many. But you can rest assured this is a prominent theme in his art. The other thing he does, and this is common with other artists of this period, is shows an extended family of Christ. And the extended family, so here what we're seeing in a print from 1511 is, again, Virgin Mary here, again, Joseph, as we saw in the print on the left. But here the Virgin Mary is offering this delightfully chubby Christ child to Anna, who is the Virgin Mary's mother, while Joachim, who is the Virgin Mary's father, stands by. Mary's parents are not mentioned in the Bible, but in an early apocryphal text, which was widely read and widely believed in the Middle Ages, her parents were named Anna and Joachim. And the story told in that text about Anna and Joachim was that they were an old couple who had been married for at least 20 years and had had no children, and were convinced they would have no children. Then an angel appeared to Joachim and announced to him that that his wife Anna would bear a son, or excuse me, bear a child. And that child is the Virgin Mary, a miraculous gift. Anne and Mary and the Christ child become an incredibly prominent subject in art and devotion from about 1450 to about 1525. I'm showing you here another image that's in the current exhibition that was given to the Allen by Betsy Beer Franklin, who I know was in attendance last week. So if she's in attendance now, I want to thank her for this gift. It's this amazing image of this sort of windswept virgin, now also in lost profile, a little bit like Endris, holding the Christ child with her mother Anna here. One of the really striking things for me about the prominence of the combination of Saint Anne, the Virgin, and the Christ child is this emphasis, in a sense, on a matriarchal family, where it's the matrilineal line through the Virgin Mary to Anne that is being highlighted in prints like this. So that in a print like the one on the right, Joseph and Joachim stand to the back, to the flank. They are sort of parenthetical on the composition. The real important exchange is between the Virgin Mary, the Christ child, his grandmother Anne, which is the same kind of exchange that we're seeing here in this print on the left. But we do have prints that show Joachim more prominently, and the relationship between Anne and Joachim more prominently. So I'm showing you two images from The Life of the Virgin, that same book that Dürer publishes in 1511 that showed the dormition, or the death of the Virgin Mary. Here we're seeing that annunciation to Joachim by the angel that his wife Anne is pregnant, and they will, after all these years, have a child. And then he goes back to Anne, and they have a meeting that's called the Meeting at the Golden Gate, where they each know now Anne is pregnant, and they rejoice with this embrace. This is a chance for us to again think about an intersection between the lives of these holy figures, this holy family, and Dürer's life and his family. Remembering again that the marriage between Agnes and Albrecht is childless. If we look at this painting, which is now in the Met, which Dürer does in 1519, we have, again, this matrilineal line. So we have St. Anne, Christ's grandmother, very delicately clad and piously clad, so only her face is showing. We have a very youthful Virgin Mary here, and then the Christ child in, I think we could say, sheltered both by Mary and by Anne. The figure of St. Anne in this painting is a preparatory study that Dürer does, a drawing, which I'm showing you here. And in the preparatory study for St. Anne, it's Agnes Dürer who served as the model. So that Dürer, when he's working on this painting of the Holy Family, St. Anne, the Virgin and Child, casts his wife, at least, in the preparatory study as St. Anne. And I don't want to belabor this too much, the identity between Anne, childless for most of her marriage, and then miraculously giving birth, conceiving and giving birth to the Virgin Mary. I don't want to belabor the connection to the childless couple, Albrecht and Agnes, too much. But at the same time, as we try to walk this balancing act, if we recognize that Dürer's self-portrait of 1500 is absolutely intentionally, self-consciously engaging with the tradition of portraits of Christ, I think we can imagine that when he casts his wife as Anne, at least in this preparatory study, when he uses his wife as the model for St. Anne, he's thinking about resonances between the story of Anne, Joachim, and Mary, and his own experience with his wife. Are there questions here, or what we've been talking about?
A question here about the fact that sometimes the Madonna has a halo and sometimes not. So what was in Dürer's mind when he made the decision to include halos or not?
I'm going back to see if if I can come up with sort of pattern here. I think in the ones I've shown you, the Madonna with the monkey here on the right is the only one with halo. I think in the other cases, we've got figures who are posed in such a way that there are other sort of either radiant aspects, like the radiant lines emanating from God the Father and the Holy Spirit here, which perhaps obviate the need for a halo. If we go back here, I think what we could also see, these prints are so similar to each other. In each case, Mary's head is silhouetted against a bare sky. I think this suggests that the presence or the absence of the halo is an individual decision made with each individual print and not necessarily motivated by a desire to communicate something larger. So that I don't know that the audience looking at the print on the left might have said, well, where's her halo? Or the audience looking at the print on the right might have said, why does she have a halo here and not in his other ones? I think this is an independent pictorial choice that doesn't necessarily carry much meaning. But excellent observation on the distinctions.
What kind of wood did Dürer use for his woodcuts? How did he manage to create such detailed images in his woodcuts?
So the wood that he usually uses would have been some sort of a fruit wood, most likely, perhaps pear or apple. We think at times boxwood may have been used, so very, very hard woods. Although notably in the prints that we're looking at now, both of these are engravings instead of woodcuts. Here, if we're looking at the Holy Family, this is a woodcut here, and I think you can tell the quality of the lines, while still incredibly high, is maybe I would say a different quality of line in the woodcuts, where you're removing the material away from the lines that we'll print, as opposed to the engraving when you're engraving into the copper with the burin the lines that we'll print.
Okay, another observation. Mary almost never has a head covering, which would have been unusual for a married woman in Dürer's day. Is there a significance to this?
Excellent. And I think we could see that if we look in particular at the contrast here. Well, we can look at the contrast here where Mary's hair is so clearly flowing and Anne's head so conspicuously covered. If we went to this image, Anne's head covered, as you noted, Mary's head uncovered. Here, I think it's most likely that in these cases, the uncovered head is a recognition that Mary remains a virgin even after the birth of Christ.
In the double portrait drawing of the girl with the braids and Agnes, the girl's facial features seem very much like Agnes's. If you look at the chin, the mouth, the eyes, nose ridge, etc. Did Dürer have standard facial types, or was the girl Agnes as a younger person, or something else?
Excellent question. I think Dürer, like most artists, absolutely has a standard facial type or standard facial types, maybe divided by age, youth, maturity, and elderly, and then divided by gender as well. And so here, as I think that excellent observation suggests, when he goes to draw a face, he has a set of habits. And one of the things he's doing is tailoring his habits and adjusting his habits to the particular face in front of him. I think in the case here, where his real goal seems to have been the elaborate hairstyle and clothing of the girl from Cologne, the habit of a face would probably actually helpful in helping him record this speedily. So I think the similarity we see between the two faces is more, as you suggested, between his habits of rendering faces than an attempt to say, oh, this is what Agnes looked like as a young girl, this is what she looks like now. I think that's also the case given that this is a sketch produced fairly rapidly. We know on this journey that he's taking through the Netherlands and through Germany along the Rhine.
There are no more questions dealing with the family, the Holy Family right now.
All right, so let me get to last kind of families I want to deal with, and we'll wrap up here. In addition to working with and depicting his own family, from his parents to his wife to his brother, and depicting the Holy Family in ways that I think do intersect with his understanding of his own family. Dürer has repeated depictions of families or couples. And I just want to look at three of them very briefly, and then maybe one a little bit more extended. So in the Allen right now, there's this amazing print from 1514 of peasants dancing. A man and a woman, I think we would presume spouses, I think fairly presume spouses, although that's not explicit. This is an example of a strain in his printmaking, a trend in his printmaking, a theme, that's the word I'm looking for, in his printmaking, where he prints couples, often peasant couples or worker couples from Germany, from Nuremberg, let's say from his domestic environment. Usually when he does this, there is absolutely a class element. So he's depicting peasants or farmers. He doesn't depict in this genre subject, say, artisan couples. He doesn't depict aristocratic couples. Another kind of family he depicts, and this is also in the Allen's exhibition right now, where there's a theme on families, Turkish families. This is a print from the 1490s. The figure is identifiable as Turkish because of the turbans that they wear. The woman in particular exoticized as a Turk by the fact that she's got bare feet, unlike her husband, and one bare breast, and holding a child, which is one of the ways we recognize this as a family. In Dürer's day, from the 1490s through his death in 1528, Ottoman Turkey was a subject of fascination and fear. Dürer probably would have seen Ottoman ambassadors in Venice on one of his trips there. But the Germans were also worried, European Christians were also worried about Ottoman attacks on Eastern Europe. And the Ottomans eventually reached the gates of Vienna after Dürer's death. So there is a kind of fascination with this Islamic other who are both distant and quite proximate. And one of the things I think we see Dürer doing with a print like this is using the subject of the family for a kind of comparison and contrast. So the Ottomans dress differently, but they still have families. He's giving us a nuclear Ottoman family, effectively. The same mother, child, father group that he gives us in his Christian subject matter, for example, or in some of his peasant subject matter. And then he also turns to the distant past for family subjects. So in another print that's in the Allen, a satyr, nymph, and child, he's got, again, that same kind of nuclear family triad, the child, the mother, and the father, now projected on a kind of mythological classical past, or projected into a mythological classical past, where the father is a satyr, the mother a nymph, and the child their offspring. The mother resting on this rude fur cloak in a completely forested setting, a kind of literally a forest primeval, an ancient forest from some time in classical antiquity. Are there questions or comments here about this now, we could say, secularized family?
Not yet.
So if we're looking at this satyr family on the right, we could also bring it back, I think, to another Dürer print that was executed only a year before, which we could think of in a family context, potentially, in an interesting way. This, the print of Adam and Eve, which I talked about last time, from 1504. Last time I talked about the way Dürer was using this as a chance to explore and promote a certain definition of ideal human proportions based on ancient art. It's also, of course, in another lens, the beginning of human families. And the presence of Adam and Eve in a similarly lush forest to the family that we see with the satyr, nymph, and child is an indication, in some sense, of families at the origin of humanity in the most remote periods of time, either remote culturally, like the satyr and nymph, or remote from the creation of the world in the Adam and Eve on the left. And this is the kind of lens, I think, that once we begin to look for families in Dürer, and think about families as something that matter comes up over and over and over again. And the last piece I want to show you is the last new piece, is the way he uses a family in some sense as a storytelling device. This is a somewhat confusing print from the late 1490s. It's often called The Cook and His Wife. That's the title it's come to be known by, starting in the 19th century. Absolutely in line subject matter wise to some degree with the peasants dancing. Although the wife here is potentially a bit higher class and more statuesque than the peasant we see dancing on the left. But this phrase, the way this has been known, the cook and his wife, is, I think, a misreading of the subject of this. This goes back to a text which was written about by a French author who was writing a guide for his daughters for how to be good wives, and cautioning them about holding up good examples and cautioning them about bad examples. This was a text that Dürer had illustrated during his Wanderjahre, and he's returning to the subject here in this print. And this gives us also insight into, I think, a kind of family dynamic. And he's using a family dynamic, a mysterious family dynamic, almost to animate this print. The story that this print refers to is about a man who's not shown in this print, I would argue. And the man is keeping an eel in his fish pond. Eels were a delicacy, and this man is quite proud of the eel he's keeping in his fish pond. And he's saving it for some future date when he knows he'll have an important guest, and he'll haul the eel out of his fish pond and be able to impress his guest. Then the man goes off on a trip, leaving the eel unprotected. His wife loves eel and decides she's going to, in her husband's absence, eat the eel. So she calls to her cook, has her cook catch the eel. He cooks it, and they eat it together. The husband returns and finds the eel missing from the pond, and so inquires of the wife, where has the eel gone? And the wife says she doesn't know. At which point, her pet magpie, and that's the bird we see between the shoulders of the woman and the cook, calls out, your wife ate the eel. The magpie knew how to talk and had been observing everything going on, and so betrayed the confidence of the wife and the cook and told the husband what had happened to the eel. This print to me is one of the more fascinating prints in the exhibition, and gives insight, I think, potentially also into families. Because to understand the print, you need to know the story in advance. Dürer is relying on us knowing the story in advance, or being somewhat mystified by this bird placed between a cook and a woman looking out at us. If we know the story in advance, then we, when we're looking at this print, are the husband in the story. We're returning to the wife. We're finding at our house the eel is gone that we've been saving for an important guest, and having to figure out what's gone on, what's happening here. That kind of mystery embedded in the family, and this in a fairly common print, as people were asking about inexpensive prints. I think this is a print that probably would not have cost very much. But this shows Dürer, in a sense, we might almost compare it, if we were looking for a rough analogy, to a sitcom today, some kind of family drama today, that's putting us in the shoes of one of the members of that family, and inviting us to puzzle out what's gone on. This gives us, I think, a sense of the way in which families were fertile subject matter, families happy, families unhappy, and families holy, fertile subject matter for Dürer. And so I'd like to conclude today now, but I'm happy to take questions.
Dürer's depiction of the Ottoman family, showing the wife partially bare, is not at all typical of a Muslim family. Was it likely that he had never seen a Muslim female?
Excellent question. Excellent observation. I think it's all but certain that he never would have seen a Muslim woman in his travels. And I think you've also touched on something. This is absolutely an exoticizing device meant to make this Turkish family seem all the more alien to his German audience that he's selling this to. This is the potentially threatening other to that German audience. And this is meant to be a kind of exoticizing, distancing device. I think we could say it's performing a similar function in this print of the Turkish family to the way the prominent erection on the Seder is serving as an exoticizing device in that mythological subject, where again, the nymph is completely naked, which would be completely different than the way he shows German families, even rustic peasant families like the dancers here.
And can you comment on Dürer's signature mark that often appears as if on a small hanging plaque?
Yeah, so the AD that we see repeatedly, I'm sorry, let me go to actually, so that was the best ones. The plaque here or on the inscription. So he has, I think, he must have been grateful to his father for naming him Albrecht, so he could have AD as the monogram, which goes so nicely on this plaque, which almost always has the date. This is something he puts on virtually all of his prints after 1496. This goes back to something I was talking about last week, where as an entrepreneur, he's really trying to build a recognizable, distinct market for his prints. And the monogram plays a very prominent role in that. I think we can also imagine that for his collectors, and as I said, he had collectors, one of the things they would have prized was the different ways he deployed the monogram in each individual print. So very rarely, especially after 1500, does it repeat exactly. It's one of the ways he's exercising his creativity.
Did churches commission any of his works?
Excellent. So some of his paintings are commissioned for churches, sometimes by bishops, but most often it's individual patrons commissioning his painting that they'll put in a family chapel or a chapel they're supporting. When it came to his printmaking, most of his prints are of his own initiative, although he does do several ambitious prints for the Emperor Maximilian, where the emperor is effectively the patron.
And finally, how did Dürer interact with his apprentices in terms of the engraving plates?
That's an excellent question, and we wish we knew more about it. During the years he was in Venice the second time, he leaves an artist, Hans Balding Green, more or less in charge of his workshop back in Venice, or back in Nuremberg, although we've got to imagine Agnes also having a share in the management of the workshop. Whether his apprentices would have contributed, say, to carving woodcuts. They're probably not, because there would be formal woodcutters. In terms of the engraving of his prints, there I think we've got to imagine Dürer being the one who's working the burin, and what his apprentices would have done would have helped in the inking and wiping of the plates and the actual printing of them. Excellent question.
And the last one, which was asked in several different ways by others, the eating of the eel seems symbolic of infidelity. The cook's wife is depicted as pregnant, right?
Excellent. So I think absolutely there is a strong implication of infidelity. I think Dürer actually plays that up with this print in a way that's not necessarily as strongly implied in the original story. I don't know that we can take this woman's body, though, as representing pregnancy. If we look at a lot of standing representations of standing women from the 15th century into the early 16th century, the sort of prominent abdomen that we see here is often used on women who are not shown as pregnant. But I also think this is a print that welcomes ambiguity. So maybe it would be better even to say that we can't be sure, the same way the husband can't be sure what happened to the eel or potentially what even happened at all.
Okay. I think that ends all the questions, Erik. I know you have another commitment in just a few minutes. Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. I'll just say briefly that one of the things that's been a real delight in working on this exhibition, seeing the people who attended last week, getting to meet Wolfgang Steckau's daughter, was the way that because of the prominence of the Dürer collection at Oberlin, especially since the Max Kade gift in the 1960s, because of Wolfgang Steckau's teaching all these years, I felt that working on Dürer and speaking with you the last 2 weeks has given me this incredible connection to generations of the Oberlin community. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that and your sustained support of Oberlin and the Allen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for tuning into the Allen. Please check our website for upcoming events.